Hello, Mr. Flying Bird. My name is Jan Cruz, and for today's video, I will be lecturing you on how first mover disadvantages relate to pioneering cost. Now, before I lecture you on how first mover disadvantages relate to pioneering cost, I'll be explaining the timing of entry for firms. So, once global firms have found a market that they deem to be attractive and want to enter in it, they should consider the timing of entry. Entry is early when an international business enters a foreign market before other global firms, and late when it enters after other global businesses have already established themselves. Recall that in earlier chapters we learned about first mover advantages, which are advantages that go with entering a market early. In contrast to first mover advantages, we have first mover disadvantages. First mover disadvantages are disadvantages for global firms entering a market before other global firms. So first mover disadvantages relate to pioneering costs because first mover disadvantages can give rise to pioneering costs. So pioneering costs arise when the business system in a foreign country is so different from that in a firm's home market that the enterprise has to devote considerable time, effort, and expense to learning the rules of the game. Pioneering costs include the cost of business failure if the firm, due to its ignorance of the foreign market, makes big mistakes. There is a certain liability that goes with being a foreigner, and this liability is greater for global firms that enter a national market early. Research shows that the probability of survival increases if an international business enters a national market after several other global firms have already established themselves. The late entrant may benefit by observing and learning from the mistakes made by early entrants. So pioneering costs also include the cost of promoting and establishing a product offering, including the cost of educating customers. These can be significant if the product being promoted is unfamiliar to local consumers. In contrast, later entrants can also ride on an early entrant's investments in learning and customer education by watching how the early entrant proceeded in the market. The later entrants can avoid costly mistakes made by the early entrants and exploit the market potential created by the early entrants' investments in customer education. So take for example, KFC introduced the Chinese to American style fast food by being one of the first to establish their business in China, but a later entrant, McDonald's, capitalized on the market in China later on. An early entrant can also be put at a severe disadvantage relating to a later entrant if regulations change in a way that diminish the value of an early entrant's investments. This is a serious risk in many developing markets where the rules that govern business practices are always changing. Early entrants can find themselves at a disadvantage if a later change in regulations invalidate prior assumptions about the best business model for operating in that country. So one example of this is Uber. In one German court ruling, they halted Uber ride-hailing services in Germany, arguing that the US company lacks a necessary license to offer passenger transport services using rental cars. Now, I hope this helps Mr. Flying Bird in learning about pioneering costs.